I often refer to like carrying grief in an interesting way. So, like when people experience loss, people oftentimes don't know what to say or they're nervous to sometimes have those kinds of conversations. And I would say to some degree that that experience is not just there in loss related to death. But I think, when you are dealing with family members who are experiencing addiction, there is a grief and a sense of loss when you don't have that person in your life in the same way that you might have imagined that you would.
Welcome to the Becoming Sound podcast, where we dive into the tough stuff and try to find the humor in the hot mess of being an adult child. Join me as we peel back the layers on growing up in dysfunction, navigating substance abuse, mental health challenges, and everything in between. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Becoming Sound podcast. I'm Krista, your host, and thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. I have Cherie Sawaryn on the show today. She is the founder of BeeKind Hive. And if the name of her business does not tell you about the incredible energy this lady has, stay tuned because you're about to experience it for yourself. Cherie is a visionary leader and a natural gatherer of people with over 20 years of experience transforming the student leadership community. She is known for her talent in building trusting team cultures. She excels in relationship building, coaching, and communication, empowering others to thrive both personally and professionally. Cherie loves designing games and creative workshops that inspire connection, spark creativity, and encourage critical thinking. She hosts what she calls cup of tea leadership circles, which we're going to learn about. She also holds, I believe, book clubs. Cherie has an incredible insight on navigating grief and loss and really how to sit in the messiness. So I encourage you to listen to the end of this episode for all of the passion that she has for creating change and positive leadership. So let's get started. Hi, Cherie. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Krista. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. I've been looking forward to this interview.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to connect and to share. I think it'll be a
Exactly.
good chat.
I want to start by asking you to tell me a little bit about your background, your childhood, and how that impacted you.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I won't get into details of my entire background, but I think the pieces that are somewhat relevant for your audience and the folks who are listening. So I'm an adult. I mean, sort of an adult. I don't know. Uh,
Good answer.
so they tell me based on my age, I'm an
Yeah,
adult.
that's awesome.
But no, I grew up with my dad who when I was young was an alcoholic, and he got sober probably when I was around 10. He worked a lot out of town and such, and he passed away when I was 18. So having experienced that at a really young age, that really
Mhm.
shaped a lot of how I lead now. So in addition to my dad, my sister also struggled with addiction for
Mhm.
the majority of her, I would say, adult life, but it probably started when she was a little bit younger, and she died in her early 40s,
Mhm.
about 10 years ago, actually. So both of those experiences, having experienced that type of loss at a fairly
Mhm.
young age, really gave me. I often actually say that grief gave me a gift, which I've only learned to probably appreciate or really sort of understand in the last few years. And that really is that I have developed a capacity to be able to really hold space for big feelings.
Mhm.
That's something that wasn't really available when I was young. And those weren't really things that we talked about,
Mhm.
especially like when I was 18 or 20 years old and you're dealing with the kind of emotions of loss and grief, it's tough to find places and spaces where you feel like you can really connect and belong with other people. And so my experience with that has really led me to a place where I really try and create spaces that allow people to have some room to bring their big feelings into some of those conversations and create that sense of connection and belonging. And um, yeah, it's just like I said, it's been a really unique sort of gift that I've been
Hmm.
able to share.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on the ability to hold big feelings? I mean, when you come from alcoholism or addiction or whatever the case is, that is not usually the case. Like it's really tough. Usually we're pushing that stuff down. We're like trying to ignore it instead. So what do you think gave you the ability to do that?
Yeah, I think again, like one being really young when my dad passed away, like I mean not really young, but like a young adult. I think that when you go through things like that when you are at that age and you come out on the other side of it, I think that that experience allows you to maybe step into spaces that you might otherwise have shied away from, right? I almost kind of feel like what most people imagine the most horrible thing that would happen in their life.
Uh-huh.
But when something really big like that does happen in your life and you come out of it on the other side and it doesn't destroy you, you then learn that you can handle really big things.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to hold that kind of space, having been through that, and I often refer to like carrying grief in an interesting way. So, like when people experience loss, people oftentimes don't know what to say or they're nervous to sometimes have those kinds of conversations. And I would say to some degree that that experience is not just there in in loss related to death. But I think, when you are dealing with family members who are experiencing addiction, there is a grief and a sense of loss when you don't have that person in your life in the same way that you might have imagined that you would. And so I think being able to be kind of on the other side of that allowed me that ability to just sit and be in that space and to understand not their not someone else's exact experience, but there is a relational sort of thing that happens in that space where you just sort of feel a little bit better understood. So I think that sort of piece of it and coming through on the other side of it just allowed me to sit with those feelings, and for people to understand that the feelings that they're feeling are normal.
Yeah.
Like it's normal in grief or in that moment to feel things that we oftentimes don't allow ourselves to acknowledge, like anger or frustration or
Mm-hmm.
um sadness, or honestly, in some cases, even relief. My dad died of cancer. So, like, there was an aspect of, watching someone suffer that, there's a sense of relief. And we're not
Uh-huh.
supposed to feel that, right?
Yeah.
um,
I I can totally relate with that. I mean, my dad didn't die of cancer. He actually died due to alcohol. And I was a little bit older, but it's like my initial thought was relief. It's like he wasn't suffering anymore. And then I felt bad for thinking that.
yeah,
So,
because we have this sort of way of carrying grief that is acceptable in the world, and because I just don't think a lot of times it's talked about. So I always kind of describe it as like grief is like walking with a really slow friend. And you have to slow down and you have to walk with grief along, like if you try and get ahead of it, it it's going to catch up
Yep.
eventually. But if you can take the time to just be with it and not exclude it from your life, but
Hmm.
I kind of describe it as like you walk with it until such time that you can start to pick it up and you get stronger and you can start to pick it up and carry it.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
I
and
love
then
that.
you just sort of integrate it into your being. It never goes away. I don't know whoever said that time heals
Mm.
wounds. That's wrong,
Yeah. Oh, I think
in my
there's always a part of
experience.
it. It's just it's how you carry it and where you're holding it, right? And how you hang on to that. It's what it looks like later on. It doesn't really go away.
Yeah, I don't think it goes, I don't think it goes away, but I do think that it changes you. It
Hmm.
changes who you are fundamentally, as a person, and you will carry it, and
Hmm.
you will also expand in order to be able to carry it if you allow yourself to do that. And I think that's the
Hmm.
piece where, you know, creating that space gives people permission to be able to carry that grief
Hmm.
in a different way, and to walk with it, and to integrate it in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah. Are you the oldest, youngest?
Yeah, so there was just my sister and I, so I'm the
Hmm.
youngest.
Okay.
Or the younger, I don't know, when there's only two.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
Youngest,
sister,
younger, all of them.
yeah, my
Right?
sister was 7 years older than I
Okay.
was.
Yeah. You kind of made reference to being like the mediator, right? Is that how you saw yourself in your family?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
when you grow up in a family where there is addiction, there's, I mean, I used to honestly sort of laugh, and I mean, maybe this is part of it. I used to say we put the fun in dysfunctional.
That's a great way of
Um,
looking at it.
but I mean, I don't think that, I don't really actually think that there are
Yeah.
families out there that are really like normal. Uh, I think we may all have varying degrees of
Hmm.
dysfunction. But yeah, I mean, I think I ended up sort of being a lot of that sort of mediator, kind of using that humor or that ability to sort of be relational, to kind of
Hmm.
keep the peace, where I could when there were, really sort of tense situations, and just sort
Hmm.
of being able to kind of be in the middle of the mess seemed to be where I found myself often.
Hmm.
And that is something that, turns out growing up like that kind of hones those skills. And so, I've been able to now be a lot more comfortable than other folks maybe in being in some of those situations in my leadership and in the work that I've done
Hmm.
since. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
all. There are gifts in all of it, I think, for sure. And the ability to see that even at a younger age and really hone in on that and use it to your advantage. So how does that work in the work that you do? How have you honed in on that skill?
Yeah, so in my sort of work life, I work in higher education, and I work with a lot of students who are in sort of transition times. So again, kind of in that messy middle kind of part, right?
Mhm.
They're going through post-secondary, so we're kind of a stop on their way onto like their career. So oftentimes that time is very transitional with a lot of growth. So it's been a gift for me to be able to sit with them in a lot of the decision making that they're going through,
Mhm.
and to be able to, like I said, just kind of hold that space for some of the things that folks might be experiencing, I find that especially in post-secondary, it's one of the places that you see so many people coming from so many different backgrounds and experiences. And we don't know how people come through the door. We don't
Hmm.
know what their lived experience has been before they come. We just know that it's our role and like my job is just to support
Hmm.
them as they make that transition into their working world. And so oftentimes there's a lot of growth and exploration that comes in that space of learning. And so it's just been something that oftentimes people have said, I get asked all the time, like, how do I sit in the middle of these things? Or how do I bridge some of those gaps? And for a long time, I didn't really know what people kind of were talking about because it was so much a part of who I am. It's like
Hmm.
asking a fish what it's like to live in water.
Exactly, right?
Like
You're
you
just
just
doing it automatically, so you don't even really think of it as something different. And that's a skill that you had when you were a kid, so it just naturally, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, you just honed it, right? Because like
Yeah.
that, and I mean to some degree, you feel like, and whether it was, technically like survival, but like the things that you acquire in those sort of younger years
Uh-huh.
in order to sort of navigate and kind of keep things kind of calm or to mitigate, you know, destruction or, just manage a lot of times managing other people's, it felt like managing other people's emotions and feelings and,
Uh-huh.
kind of steering or directing things in kind of a way to minimize potential harm. And so
Uh-huh.
a lot of that I feel like is something that I now do in my sort of day to day kind of operational piece. And so because I was doing so much of that, it really sort of led me to starting a company
Uh-huh.
where I could help or I could support other leaders who were struggling, emerging leaders who were struggling with sort of handling a lot of really big feelings and managing
Uh-huh.
transition and doing a lot of that work. So both, obviously it came from that place of childhood and kind of honing that natural ability. And then, throughout my career, kind of really being in positions where that seemed to be valued. So, kind of coming out of that space and being like, how can I do more of this in a more
Uh-huh.
meaningful way for more leaders? And yeah, that's a big piece of how BeeKind Hive kind of got born into
Uh-huh.
existence, was out of this desire to support people and to create, a sense of belonging with teams and to support
Uh-huh.
us and, having big conversations and navigating struggles and change and doing it in a good way without burning out and supporting people in understanding that they don't have to take on everything and
Mm.
that everything isn't theirs to
Yeah.
necessarily to carry. And I think that's something that a lot of people sort of struggle with in
Uh-huh.
talking to folks. So, and I
Yeah.
would say especially people who have had similar kind of experiences, oftentimes in those kind of spaces where, you are living with folks who are struggling with addiction. There
Uh-huh.
is this sort of desire to take on a responsibility for them
Uh-huh.
or to try and navigate that. I used to kind of say like when I had kind of been in some of those spaces and when you realize that you can't do that for someone else, like I would show up and I would be there. And I mean, I sat in all of those rooms. And I spent a good chunk of my time, really trying to inspire the work to, sort of stick with people who I loved. And, at the end of the day, I couldn't do the work.
Mhm.
for those individuals. They really needed to do that work themselves. And so that's a big piece of what I try and share with other people is when people come and they're like exhausted and really struggling. It's one of the first things I ask people is, where is your energy going?
Exactly. I mean, it's not just adult children of alcoholics or addiction or whatever, but a big key component is we are fixers, we are controllers, we are taking on everything, and you just get to a space where you are burnt out, right? And I love that you can sit with people and actually help them figure that out and then navigate that into something different that works for them, which is so crucial for so many people. Burnout is huge. You know, we're just running the clock constantly, working constantly. Everyone's in a state of hurry, hurry, hurry. We got to get it done, done, done. I am curious to hear about the group coaching program that you're developing, and this is around burnout as well.
Yeah, so I'm still in the process of developing
Mhm.
it. I'm going to open up the wait list here in the next little bit, but it'll be on my website if anybody is feels so
Yeah.
inclined that they want to check it out. Um, but yeah, so I've done a bunch of market research. I was
Mhm.
like, where are my tired change makers, my rebel rousers? So the people who really are optimistic and do really see a
Mhm.
different way of functioning, but really just don't know how to get there. And I feel like they're doing things on their own. Oftentimes this is sort of emerging leaders. So they're kind of coming into leadership at an early stage, or this is kind of like their first time kind of in that
Mhm.
sort of space. And I use
Mhm.
leadership in a very loose sense. Like
Mhm.
it's not a title thing. It's it's an agency thing. So like, are
Yeah.
you, leading in your own life?
It's kind of like a personal thing too, right? It's
Yeah.
like, are you feel like you want to step up your own game or step up in your own life and show up as more of a leader for yourself. So yeah,
Yeah,
love
and
that.
what I was really seeing is there were a lot of folks who were identified really much like identified as like heart-centered and like really
Mhm.
on the front lines of caring and supporting other people. But what I was seeing is that those folks were really struggling with
Yeah.
burnout and being at or over capacity.
Uh-huh.
And without the capacity to really sort of shift into that place where they could really create the kind of impact and change that they wanted to. And
Uh-huh.
so I started to sort of dig into it and have these conversations with folks to really kind of find out what was going on. And a lot of what I learned was that people were struggling to manage their energy. The pattern started to emerge that, a lot of folks were taking on things that weren't necessarily their responsibility, but
Uh-huh.
they felt that they were either obligated to do it or they felt that they had a responsibility to do some of these things. And then
Uh-huh.
on the counter side of that, they also were maybe not conscious of ensuring that they had things in their life that were refilling their energy. Because
Uh-huh.
it's not enough to just stop doing things that drain your energy.
Uh-huh.
You actually have to
You have to
consciously
fill the cup
fill
back
it
up.
back up.
Yeah, 100%. I
I
feel like you're
wanted you to say
talking, I feel like you're talking right to me right now. And you're like calling me out. Because honestly, it's just, I feel where you're coming from and I understand some of the feedback that you got. I can resonate with that. You know, when you're starting a new business, just like I started this podcast and I started a coaching business, and I come from an environment where my programming is to want to do everything myself and be hyper independent and thinking that I can do it all. And there's so many things that I didn't realize I could take off my plate and delegate to someone else and also to keep doing my self-care. It can get really overwhelming really fast if you don't kind of know where to turn or know what kind of strategies to use. Yeah. Speaking my language, girl.
when you've grown up in environments where like you didn't feel like you could rely on other people or
Mhm.
people said they would be there and then they didn't show up and so you
Yeah.
did create sort of a need or a desire to do things on your own. And it does lead to some semblance of that sort of hyper kind of approach to life. And I think so many of us have done that,
Mm-hmm.
that we lose sight of the benefit of being in community, and the care that comes in community care. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what I have seen is that folks often do that as a way to protect themselves
Mm-hmm.
instead of enacting boundaries. So, you kind of like take everything and you're like, okay, well, I'll just do everything, instead of actually holding people accountable for the things that they said that they would do. And so I think when we start to have some of those conversations and we start to
Mm-hmm.
sort of shift and we start to approach things from collective care versus individual care, even when we call it self care, like we're not designed to only take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We are designed to be supported by other people. And that can be really difficult for a lot of people who haven't had
Mm-hmm.
positive experiences with that in their past and have built some pretty significant walls around what that looks like. So
Mm-hmm.
I think having people sort of experiment in small ways with
Yeah.
not just like delegation is certainly a part of it, but I think it goes a little bit further than that. And I think there's an element where when we allow ourselves to be supported, it's a different kind of letting
Mm-hmm.
go,
There's a
right?
trust factor in there.
Yeah, we build
Yeah.
we build that
Build
trust.
trust. Yeah.
And sometimes we like when I talk about boundaries, I can have a relationship now with almost anybody because I've been able to create boundaries that are comfortable for me.
Mm-hmm.
I can have relationship, um, even with like family members who would be in active addiction, because I have boundaries around what I'm willing to do or how I'm willing to support and how I'm not.
Yeah.
And I'm very clear both with myself and with them around what that looks like. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't take it personally. I don't take it personally at
Yeah.
all when someone, like I know when they're pushing on that and it's not
Mm-hmm.
moving and there's a level of frustration, that's their feelings around it, but it doesn't impact how I move through that.
Yeah.
But that took a
Exactly.
long time.
Yeah, it does. And it's also the awareness and recognizing that people are just showing up in their own capacity, in their own level of awareness. And so if you have good boundaries within yourself and your own stuff, then you're able to like just keep on moving, acknowledge that that's their capacity for understanding. I wanted you to talk a little bit about the community too, because I absolutely could not agree more about surrounding yourself with people who can lift you up, who can support you. It is really tough to ask for that support. I know in my experience, once I started letting that in and just really embracing that people wanted to help me and support me, it's like a new level of love, you know? And so I want you to explain a little bit about what your community looks like.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the whole concept around sort of Be Kind Hive really kind of came from that hive idea that one, we could be kinder to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but just the whole idea of creating a hive and creating space where we have shared or common purpose and we understand sort of what we're doing, but then we allow people to actually bring themselves and their strengths into those spaces and we honor what that looks like. So one of the things that I love to do, I'll host what I call hive gatherings,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes I just kind of bring together like a really, I would say a fairly eclectic group of folks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but from all different sort of like backgrounds and lived
Mm-hmm.
experiences and ages to just be in conversation together to create like there's an art that happens when you gather in those kinds of spaces and you have conversations at a deeper, more meaningful level. Not to say that there's not benefit to small talk. It certainly connects people
Mm-hmm.
at a sort of initial level, but people are really craving that. I don't know if it's coming out of the pandemic or the fact that we're using technology so much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I feel like there people are really craving this relational connection.
It's like craving heart conversations, you know?
Yeah, it's so nourishing. Like every time I host one of those types of events, I get a message like, I've been thinking about this, or I've been thinking about something that was said. Like, my heart feels
That's
so
awesome.
full. And you just know that that's something in a world that feels sometimes so polarized and divided, that when we can just connect at a human level and just remember that we're all part of the same world, and
Mm-hmm.
we can create that sort of sense of connection, it really does change the way we show up.
It does for sure. I think we live up here so often. So much of our day is spent in our heads, and so much of our lives are spent up here that the minute you feel like your heart's being seen and heard, or you're able to take in someone else's heart energy, it's a whole different feeling. It's like that's the kind of conversation that people absolutely crave. Um, you have something called cup of tea leadership. What is that? I was curious.
Yeah. So, and that's something that's evolving a little bit and
Okay.
largely from some of these conversations. So I started it initially as this online space where folks could, sign up and come and just be in that space of heart-centered leadership over a cup of tea. So I kind of like use the cup of tea as a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of an analogy for both filling up our cups, but also like spilling the tea a little bit,
Yeah.
right? So like
I
a
love
little
that.
bit of truth bombs being laid down a little in that
Yeah.
space. And so but what I started to realize from some of the folks who were showing up in that space and then some of the folks who were showing up in sort of this in person was that there were really specific things that folks were looking for. And that's
Mhm.
really what sort of shifted me into starting to develop this new program. That I would say kind of attracted folks. And then through that, I really started to understand a little bit better what people's needs were. And so some version of cup of tea will be kind of making its comeback in this sort of
Yeah.
group program that I'm developing. So,
That's
yeah, so
awesome.
my hope is that we'll get in a little deeper on some of those topics. So,
Hmm.
around values and, realignment with values. I think that's one piece that oftentimes, especially with new and emerging leaders, I find that, they get a little lost
Hmm.
with, the sort of expectations of other people versus, what they know to be true in their own self. And then that piece around, really delving in and kind of exploring where your energy is going.
Yeah. Whether it's in your own life or in your own business or in another business, you definitely need some guidance and support, right? It's to be the best you can be for sure. So I love that. Is there anything else that you got going on right now that you want to share?
Oh, I mean, I'm excited to be doing this and speaking more about the work that I'm doing with BeeKind Hive and bringing folks into that kind of space.
Hmm.
Um, I'm taking a stand-up comedy class, so that's also fun.
Awesome. Awesome. That's so great. I would be terrified, but I'm so happy for you.
I
Wh-
think, well, and that's it, right? Like, I do
Yeah,
think there's an element of like, we have this one great, amazing life, and
yeah,
I just want to always be doing stuff that pushes me a little bit out of my comfort zone. And I've always had a bit of that humor aspect, right?
hmm,
I always kind of like describe myself as being, heart and humor centered because I think they kind of often go together. Maybe
yeah,
sometimes the humor was to maybe mask some of the heart, but they really have like learned to kind of
hmm,
integrate and work themselves together. But I was doing that, like I would be doing these things and people would be like, "You're really funny." But then I
yeah.
would be like, that was an accident. So,
Well, I've heard you speak and you are funny. Like you have such a great sense of humor and I think you'll do wonderful. That's exciting that you're doing that.
yeah, yeah, it's just one of those things. It's when you ask, am I doing anything that is
Yeah,
interesting? I would say that's probably aside from, building programs and really sort of
yeah.
evolving some of the work that I'm doing with the Hive, then yeah, the other thing that I'm doing is stepping out of my comfort zone. I really like
Good for you.
my whole leadership style is that, right? Like
Hmm.
again, having kind of come through some of those spaces, you want to be able to show people that leadership can be a little bit messy. Things don't have to look
Hmm.
perfect. And I think when we feel like we've come from places of dysfunction, we feel like those are things that we can't talk about, that messy stuff.
Hmm.
And we can come from messy situations. And I think we do other people who are watching us a disservice when we don't
Hmm.
show the struggles that we go through, when we don't
You bet.
show that, this is tough work, like asking for help or allowing yourself to be supported,
Hmm.
and just stepping out of our comfort zone. Even now, this many years into my work and my career, it's like I'm still challenging myself and still pushing myself and still doing things that scare me.
Yeah. Well, I'm all about the messy. That's exactly why I started this because if we don't talk about it, if we don't bring it up and be able to sit with it, we can't grow, right? So I think it's so important to talk about that. And yeah, the messy is where the good stuff is anyways.
Well, I like to say that, like, if if it's messy, then you're moving. Like
That's right.
Like
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
that's how you kind of know you're making progress, is there's a bit of mess. And I think especially for young leaders who are coming up, I
Hmm.
think it's really important that they see the pathway. They see that they can do it. Not just because I'm like, "Oh, well, I did it," but that they can forge their own path
Hmm.
in new ways, and that they realize that it's doing the work and taking those steps and learning to do those things that actually is going to make them better. Like, you can't learn fully
Hmm.
completely someone else's way of doing it.
Yeah.
You have to be in those spaces, have those conversations. It's
Hmm.
those things and living through those experiences that actually bring the strength and actually support you to then take those next steps and to continue to lead. And I want people to know that they can do that work, and their work might look very different than mine, and their path might be very different, but it really is about coming into themselves, and then being supported by other people who are doing similar work, or
Hmm.
uh, are experiencing similar kind of growth. So
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And you really have to be willing to embrace the messy and that's just part of it. That's part of growth. It's where the good stuff is. So I absolutely love that. How can people get a hold of you?
well, they can follow me on Instagram for all of my pep talks.
It's awesome.
So my Instagram handle is at beekind.hive. And then email is hello@beekindhive.ca. And they can get a
Perfect.
hold of me on my website. So same thing, beekindhive.ca, and that's where all of the good stuff will be. They can sign up for newsletters there, book a call, sign up for a
Awesome.
wait list,
Yeah.
come to a Hive gathering.
That's awesome. It sounds great. And when you appear on your comedic stage, for the first time, you can let us know too. So that'll be fun to come
Yeah, I
watch.
I actually am going to be away for my first showcase. So
Oh, are
I'm
you?
yeah, but I am still planning on being on the stage at some point. So I certainly once
Awesome.
I have some information, I'll certainly pass it along.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sherry, for being here and sharing all of your wisdom and just the leadership stuff. I absolutely love what you're doing. And I hope people reach out and get a hold of you if they're interested in the program or getting on the wait list. So awesome. Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate you.
you. And I very much appreciate you having me here, and I love the work that you're doing, and
Thank you.
love doing this work alongside you, and certainly yeah, just really want other folks to know that there's such tremendous power in us doing this work
There is.
collectively. So
100%, exactly. And the more people that share their stories and not just their stories of sadness or whatever, it's stories of resilience and hope, and that no matter where you come from or what you come from, you can rise above and turn it into something completely magical like you have. So thank you so much
thank
for the
you.
work that you do.
Thank you for joining me today on another episode of Becoming Sound. If this episode resonated with you in some way, please share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps to get this information out to more people who may need it. If you have a sec, I would love a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. While you're there, hit the 5-star rating and give me a review. When you're scrolling, follow me on my social platforms, and I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Have a fabulous day, lots of love and gratitude from me. Please note, the views, information, and opinions expressed during the Becoming Sound podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved. The content of this podcast is to educate, inform, and for entertainment purposes only. This podcast series and the content presented does not constitute for medical or other professional advice or services. If you are in crisis or in need of help, please contact your medical or professional provider.